Welcome to the ATCO Sustainable Solutions webinar series. My name is Filip Palasz. I'm the Business Development Lead for our Off-Diesel initiative with ATCO, but more importantly, I'll be your moderator today for our webinar. This is the fourth and final webinar in the project lifecycle of Remote Community Clean Energy Project series. In case you missed the previous episodes, you can visit our website anytime, which will pop the link into the chat function now, so you can watch these at your convenience. Before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I'm joining you today from the Yukon, which is the traditional territory from the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Ta'an Quechan Council. However, as many of you are joining us today from other places across the country, please take a moment to acknowledge the land you are on and the Indigenous people who have been stewards of that land since time immemorial. And now a couple of housekeeping tips. We encourage you to ask questions at any point throughout the webinar using the Q&A panel in Teams. Whether you're on desktop or mobile, you'll find the Q&A drop-down icon in the upper right corner and the full Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You may not see your question published until closer to the end of the presentation, so no need to submit your question more than once. And if we happen not to get to your question, we will connect with you directly after the webinar and please make sure you include your name and do not submit anonymously. And now a little bit about us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ATCO, we are a one-stop provider of integrated solutions from the delivery of efficient and reliable energy for homes, businesses, and communities to affordable temporary permanent buildings. We build communities, energize industries, and deliver customer-focused solutions across the globe. At ATCO, we also have a strong commitment to material economic reconciliation opportunities with Indigenous peoples and through clean energy projects. The sharing of benefits received are a tangible and necessary step towards authentic reconciliation. Today's webinar, our ATCO experts, Rob Arnold and Jason Massall, will take you through the ins and outs of how to manage the ongoing operations and maintenance, O&M, of your clean energy projects, including things to consider before coming up with an O&M plan, developing an O&M model, the various phases of O&M, and the benefits of having a good O&M plan. And now a little bit about our speakers, Rob and Jason. Rob has over 30 years of utility experience in the electricity industry as a leader of a team responsible for developing and managing transmission and distribution capital maintenance and asset-related operations and maintenance programs. Rob has experience in making decisions that follow all the proper asset management principles. Jason is a senior engineer for governance, compliance, and asset management, who recently earned an IAM certificate in asset management. Throughout his career, Jason has been involved in numerous distribution projects, providing power to various Indigenous communities in Alberta. As decarbonization is increasingly at the forefront of the energy industry, both Rob and Jason are eager to play an active role in learning more about managing clean energy assets and developing maintenance strategies as these assets mature. Welcome, Rob and Jason.
Thank you so much, Philip, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to be able to share my experience around operations and maintenance, or as we call it, keeping the lights on. In the previous session of this webinar series, if you've been following, you should already know how to get started, how to get the money, and how to build it. Now you have to think about how to run and maintain your new shiny widgets so you can realize the goal you have set, as well as to maybe meet your obligation as outlined in your contract or energy purchase agreement or EPA. Operations and maintenance are often considered together because most organizations tend to budget and plan for it together, but they are defined quite differently. Operations usually refers to the day-to-day activities to provide continuous service, and in our case, for you to provide energy to the community, utility company, or power purchasers. So activities like monitoring your energy output, controlling your vegetation, cleaning, and inspection are all part of the operations. Maintenance, however, is about making sure your assets do not fail, which includes planned and unplanned maintenance. Things like changing a solar panel when it's broken or taking part of a wind turbine out to kind of lubricate it. Typically, there are some requirements are also written in your contract or EPA when it comes to operating and maintaining your assets. It's really important to kind of understand and follow the requirements. For those who have been following the webinar series, like I mentioned earlier, Anton mentioned in part 3 that you should already be thinking about operation and maintenance early on in the project lifecycle instead of leaving it to the end when you energize. When you do that, it can help you to plan for resourcing needs that include how much dollars you will need, who you will need, or who you will need to train, and what tools or IT systems can help you to operate and maintain your systems better. This will have to be accounted for when you apply for capital funding to build your project, which could be a one-time request. We'll go into that again later in my later slides, but before coming up with your O&M plan, there's a few things you need to kind of think about. First, you need to think about your community, like the size and complexity of your community-led project, your project goals, your financial situation, your capability in terms of resources and knowledge, and if you can find support locally, or you have to reach out somewhere else. Other external factors like legal requirements such as safety, the environment, codes and standards are some of the things you should also be thinking about. Other things to consider is your funding model. Is this a one-time payment that you've got? Or you can ask for funding on a yearly basis for operating and maintaining. Second thing you need to consider is the needs and expectations of your community and energy purchaser. So what is important to you and your customers? Do you want to maximize energy production and minimize outages, or is the environmental impact important to you? If you are providing energy to the utility or energy purchaser, you will have to make sure you know what requirements are outlined in terms of operating and maintaining your system. You could be asked for an annual maintenance plan and also to notify the utility company on outages for your planned maintenance ahead of time. The third thing you need to consider is the scope of your O&M plan. This is so you know where the demarcation point is between you and your customers, so you know what you are responsible for maintaining. Would your O&M plan include the fleet vehicle that you are using to go out on site? What does your EPA mention when it comes to the scope of your O&M responsibilities? Once you have considered all these things, you can then start to think about maybe building a model for your O&M plan. Coming up with a model or graphical framework like this can help people to understand the steps, set of activities, and the interactions between them. It can also be used to share internally and externally about your O&M plan. This model is based on a 4-step Deming plan, do, check, act model for continuous improvement, which starts from the plan phase where you set your goals and other things that I will go over in my next slide, to the do phase where you execute your plan, to the check phase by tracking and measuring results, and lastly to the act phase where you would analyze and improve your findings. I will go over the plan phase with you, but Rob will continue with the rest. At this phase, you should already have your goals, you know what your limitations are, your capability, you know what factors are in play, what are your expectations, and the scope. You can now start drafting out your plan by listing out all the regular maintenance activities recommended by the manufacturer, all the things the utility company or energy purchaser needs you to do. Those maintenance activities should have proper processes and procedures for staff or contractors to make sure they can do their job safely and efficiently, which includes training too. You will also need to have an emergency plan, which includes spare parts or contingency plans when extreme weather event happens. Planning for resources, like I mentioned before, plus who to buy it from are all the important things to decide. You can also decide to develop your O&M capability in-house or contract it out. And it is very important to already plan and discuss upfront about these resources as part of your pre-feasibility or feasibility study. In your EPA or contract, there's usually some requirements in there that the utility company or energy purchaser demands from you when it comes to operating and maintaining your system. It's really important for you to know what they are and come up with a plan on how to meet them, because at the end of the day, they are your customers and you want them to be happy. And depending on your funding model, you should also be thinking about how you can forecast and manage your O&M budget so you can prioritize and optimize your O&M when funds are very limited. It is never a good idea to neglect maintenance or deferring it to future years, because over time it can really cost you more. Now moving on to the do phase, Rob will go through that with you.
Thanks, Jason, and good morning, everyone. As Jason mentioned, we are happy to have the opportunity to share our experience around operations and maintenance, all in alignment with good asset management practices. Jason has laid the foundation for defining what operations and maintenance is all about, along with some ideas of key considerations to take into account when preparing an operations and maintenance plan for your clean energy facility. Next, we will touch on the actual operation and maintenance of a clean energy facility. And in the context of the PDCA model that Jason discussed, the next phase is do or execution of the operations and maintenance plan. Quite simply, this phase is all about the day-to-day activities associated with operating your clean energy facility and ultimately ensuring your facility meets expectations. Some of the key activities of this phase include identifying and documenting any processes or work methods if you haven't already done that activity as part of your development phase. These would be processes and work methods that either your community team members or contract resources, if you've chosen to go that route, would follow. You will want to schedule and complete any preventative maintenance activities that are required. Similar to changing the oil in your vehicle, these are the regular maintenance activities that will support getting the most out of your facility. Typically, these are based on manufacturer recommendations. However, your energy purchase agreement may also require certain preventative maintenance activities be completed. You will also want to schedule and complete any corrective maintenance activities that are necessary to ensure your facility is operating properly. This could be anything from making adjustments to an asset that is out of tolerance, to replacing an asset that is not functioning properly, or perhaps is approaching end of life. In the event there's a sudden failure of an asset that shuts your facility down, there may be a need to complete an emergency maintenance activity to replace that failed asset or make corrections to ensure your clean energy facility is operational once again. And tied to this sudden failure scenario, it is important to have documented emergency and contingency plans in place that can be put into action to facilitate the safe and efficient execution of any emergency maintenance activities you might need to undertake. So how do you know if your clean energy facility is meeting expectations? Well, that brings us to the next phase in the PDCA model, which is check, or tracking and measuring results. In order to know if your clean energy facility is meeting expectations, you first need to understand or define what those expectations are. These could be defined by your energy purchase agreement, as we've already discussed, by manufacturer recommendations, or by any measures you feel are important to your community, as Jason had mentioned earlier. Some items to consider when determining what to track and measure include tracking the number and duration of outages your facility is experiencing, or other reliability-based measures such as percentage of time your facility is running, also known as uptime. Knowing the condition of your equipment is important, and this can be achieved through monitoring equipment condition parameters and creating health indices that provide a ranking of equipment condition. Tracking expenditures for maintenance activities could be an important financial measure that ties to the economics of your facility, and you may want to consider doing that. If there are any legislative or regulatory requirements that need to be met, it is important to track conformance to these requirements. Again, this would include requirements that are stipulated in your energy purchase agreement. There may be environmental performance criteria that needs to be met, and in that case, you will want to monitor performance against that criteria. The ability to see operational parameters at any point in time may be important to you, and to accomplish this, you will want to implement real-time reporting. The output of your facility is a good example of a parameter that would support tracking sales from your facility for comparison to what was modeled in the project development phase. Now, I do want to emphasize that it is important to identify which measures are important to you early on, upfront, as part of the development phase of your project, so you can ensure that any equipment required to provide those measures is included as part of the upfront project development. Now that you've collected all this information, what do you do with the results? Well, that takes us to the final phase of the PDCA model, which is ACT, or analyze the results and fine-tune your operation. In the context of good asset management practices, this phase is really all about continuous improvement, or finding learnings from your day-to-day operations and making any necessary corrections. This would include an analysis of the performance results and a determination of the trends and drivers of observed performance. It may also include preparation of reports and studies that reconcile the results that are being obtained with any recent changes made or against long-standing practices. Some key activities to consider as part of the ACT phase include completing an analysis of any system outages that have occurred with a focus on their underlying causes so you can understand exactly why you had an outage. Carrying out a root cause analysis of any equipment failures that you might have experienced. If the output of your facility or sales targets were not met, identify what those gaps look like and why there is a difference. Assessing the health condition of your assets and documenting those results in an appropriate format. You may want to consider evaluating how effective your preventative maintenance intervals are. Based on your test results, perhaps maintenance routines can be extended, or maybe the timelines need to be shortened. Aside from output or sales targets, there may be other performance measures you have identified, and you should be assessing these against established targets as well. There may be additional operating reports that you've established, and reviewing any gaps identified in those reports can be a learning opportunity. Now, based on all the information gathered and the analysis completed, you will then want to decide which areas of your operation, if there are any, require improvements or changes in order to move towards achieving the set expectations or objectives that you have. And then as a last step, you may want to assess whether any previous changes that might have been made by going through this process have been effective, or if in fact they've been moving the facility further away from current expectations or objectives. These are just some examples of the types of activities that can be undertaken to act on measuring and tracking results. And I want to reiterate, the end goal is to identify and act on improvement opportunities and really continuously improve your clean energy facility. The information Jason and I have shared is intended to provide a model to consider for developing and implementing an operations and maintenance plan for your clean energy facility. And we suggest there are a number of benefits in having a strong plan in place. A good operations and maintenance plan will help to maximize the output or sales of your clean energy facility. It will also help to minimize downtime of your facility, which will further optimize output and sales. A well-developed and executed plan should result in reduced operations and maintenance costs, as well as lower overall life cycle costs of your clean energy facility. Preventing premature failure of assets is another benefit of a good plan, as is having robust asset-related information to support making good asset management decisions. A strong plan will maximize the service life of your facility. A good operations and maintenance plan will help you to adapt to the impact of a changing climate on your facilities through reviewing and updating your operations and maintenance activities. And last but not least, a good operations and maintenance plan will support you in upholding the requirements of your energy purchase agreement. We hope this presentation has provided some food for thought in regards to keeping the lights on at your clean energy facility. If there's one key takeaway that we hope you get from this presentation, it is that you consider operations and maintenance impacts early on as part of your project development phase, and that you identify and include those stakeholders that will support the operations and maintenance of your clean energy facility as part of the implementation of your project. Thank you for the opportunity to share our experience.
Thank you, Rob and Jason. While this concludes the formal part of our webinar, we will now open it up to questions from our listeners. We also have another technical expert on the call today, Norm Curzon, who may field some questions as well. Norm has a lot of history. He's part of ATCO's Electric Yukon engineering team and has been the technical lead on the utility side for the integration of community lead projects in the communities of Old Crow, Beaver Creek, Kluane, and Watson Lake. As part of his role at ATCO Electric Yukon, he has been primarily focused on remote generation for almost 2 decades. So thanks for joining us today, Norm. And now we'll see if there's any questions coming from listeners. So feel free to answer or field any questions. So we got one here. What are some examples of maintenance activities that might be required?
I can take that one if you want, Philip. So, it really depends on the renewable technology itself, but the manufacturer will outline requirements for the equipment and potentially for the environment that it's installed. So, for example, for PV, there'll be a requirement for inspection of racking, physical inspection of cells, potential testing of cells, infrared, looking for hot spots, things like that are primarily done, on an annual basis. With wind or, technologies like that, the manufacturer will be very descriptive in terms of what they would like to see done. And in some cases, are looking to provide those services.
Thanks for that, Norm. Another question. Are there any pitfalls to be aware of when developing an operations and maintenance plan?
I guess I can take that one as well. Really, the biggest concern, as Rob had touched on in his part of the presentation, is being fully aware of what you need to do and what you can do in your community, and knowing that up front, and if there are gaps from a maintenance standpoint that you may not be able to service within your community, starting to plan either for developing those resources or finding those resources. Once your site or your project goes into service, you shouldn't be developing a maintenance plan at that time. Essentially, you should be looking to do it as part of the development of, construction and implementation of your project.
Thank you for that, Norm. Not seeing any further questions. We'll give it a little bit more time. Don't be shy, folks. We've got a little time left here on the webinar. We got 3 very capable people here. So, but of course, maybe they've answered all your questions with their great presentation. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes here. Okay, folks, well, we appreciate your time. It seems like we've exhausted the question portion. So this concludes now our Sustainable Solutions webinar series. We thoroughly appreciate your attendance to participation. As I mentioned before, if you missed the previous webinars, there's going to be all of them will be available for your consumption on our website. And for further questions or inquiries, included on the screen is my contact information for you to reach out anytime. Thank you again for your time today. We look forward to connecting with you to discuss how ATCO can help your community clean energy projects, and hope to see you at our future webinar series in the new year. All the best.